and welcome to Wine.com virtual experiences. I'm Gwendolyn Osborne. We are really excited to have you here for Pinot Noir, the Franco-American connection. So pretty much today, we're going to be talking all about Pinot Noir, especially the similarities and differences you get from this one grape from two very different, unique regions. So we are going to be tasting two wines today. Both are from the Boisset collection. The first hails from Burgundy, France, which is the birthplace of Pinot Noir, and that is the Bouchard Aine et Fils. The second wine we'll be having is DeLoach Vineyards Pinot Noir, and that comes from the Russian River Valley, which is also known for being one of the premier growing regions for Pinot Noir. So those are the two wines we will be tasting. For those of you who pre-purchased and purchased these wines ahead of time and will be tasting along with us, we're very excited to be able to talk about these wines while you taste them. I encourage you to make sure you have them open now. And if you can, pour them in two separate glasses to kind of taste side by side, maybe for comparing and contrasting, that's ideal. If you only have one glass, that's totally fine too. But that will kind of be interesting to be able to taste them next to each other as we talk about, again, these similarities and differences from both France and America. Joining us today to talk about these two wines, we have the one, the only, Jean-Charles Boisset, proprietor of Boisset Collection, and someone who himself kind of defines the Franco-American connection. Jean-Charles, hello, it's always good to see you.
Good afternoon, Gwendolyn. Thank you so much. Great to see you as well.
And we also, for the American portion of our connection, have Brian Maloney, chief winemaker at DeLoach Vineyards, who's been there from almost the beginning. And we are thrilled to have you here to talk about Russian River and this Pinot. So hello to you.
Thank you, Gwendolyn, and thank you for having us here.
Great. Okay, so like I said to everybody who's kind of watching and following along, if you have these wines, go ahead and pour them. Feel free to go ahead and start tasting them. We'll kind of get into more of a technical tasting rhythm a little bit later, but first I really want to dive into the stories behind these wines because they both come from properties with such rich history. So we'll start with Burgundy. The home of Pinot Noir and coincidentally also the home of Jean-Charles, right? So Jean-Charles, you acquired Bouchard back in the early 1990s. And Burgundy has a lot of interesting things going on, but this property has such an interesting history. And I know you probably had some other options. So what exactly drew you to this property? What was so exciting about it?
Well, bonjour again, Gwendolyn, and thank you for that so much. It's so exciting to be able to talk about Burgundy indeed, because for everyone to know, as you clearly outlined, the birthplace of Pinot Noir. So why Bouchard Aine? Very exciting winery because it's based in the heart of Beaune, an old, beautiful historical city founded by the Roman under the principle of castrum, which is the city within the center of the moats. And Bouchard Aine has always been one of my favorite winery because the story is fantastic. It was a family from Lyon trading silk to Northern Europe, always stopping for Burgundy. And Gwendolyn, guess what happened? A lot of love, a lot of passion between those people from Lyon. They stopped in Burgundy, met some wonderful family, and decided to set operation because as they were selling their silk, they were bringing wine as a gift, and suddenly people enjoyed a lot more the wine than the silk. So they said, why not making wine? And it really became one of the iconic, most historical winery in Burgundy. As you can see, the coat of arms, the amazing location in not only Chablis, Côte de Nuit, Côte de Beaune, Côte Chalonnaise, and the Mâconnais. So this is this splendid building, those historical cellars that seduced us, and a family who owned the winery since 1750. So we continuing their dreams and being able to follow what they've had in mind for the last 260 years plus. So it has been one of the most exciting projects we've ever done as a family, is to continue another family's dream and making really historical wine. And I'd like to say, Gwendolyn, one of the first winery as well to ever export wine to the US, and the first wine on the famous QE2, the famous boat, which brought our two countries together. You know, we always say, ocean separates us and wine brings us together.
That is beautiful. I forgot about that. I did not know that about exporting. And I love that you just have that beautiful property right in the heart of Beaune. And I haven't had a chance to visit, so it is now on my list.
Soon, as well as all our guests.
Yeah.
You know, that's the beautiful house you've seen, which is that 18th century building, which is very iconic because it was owned at a certain time by the actual, you know, Minister of Finance of Louis XV and XVI. So very fantastic place and amazing historical cellar.
And this is also where your tour of the senses began, if I am not mistaken. And this has kind of become a hallmark of many of your properties, and I love them so much when I'm visiting them. So could you tell us a little bit about what the tour of the senses is and how this place inspired you to begin that?
Well, I would say merci beaucoup for saying that, because what we want in each of our wineries is to all our guests be engaged into the alchemy of the senses, into the energy of discovering your own senses, to become enlightened. So we first started during the Hospice de Beaune of 1993, which was really the beginning of the idea of one of the most eloquent auction on the world. So we started to put fabrics and sensory in the winery so people can discover and understand the sense of touch, the sense of fabric, so silk, velvet, leather, as we describe wine, as well as the sense of smell. So maybe raspberry, vanilla, maybe licorice, maybe, you know, strawberry. And within the smell, like the org of perfume, people could really dive into that sense of smell and say, oh, I understand what they mean. The wine smell like a strawberry, like a licorice, like a cassis. And it became an enormous success. So we said, let's do that in every of our winery. So people can really, by themselves, discover, be enlightened, and really be inspired by the sensory and the wine, and the two going together.
Yeah, well, I'm so glad you did that. I love that. When I talk to people about wine, it's so much about a sense memory when you're smelling wine, of understanding what a strawberry tastes like or what that blackberry tastes like. So being able to do that in a winery before you taste the wine is, I think, something that everybody should experience. So you have that at DeLoach.
And Gwendolyn, if I may just add on this one, so many people thought we added strawberry and added the flavor up in the wine, and it allows us to really explain that it comes from the wine.
Yes, talking about wine, it's like, well, it's made from a grape, but it never really smells like grapes. So every other fruit, just not grapes. So anyway, yeah, that's why wine is so fascinating to so many. It just has so many unique characteristics. So, so that's Bouchard, beautiful place, beautiful wines. And DeLoach, so Brian, I know you were with DeLoach. I mean, you come from a winemaking background. Your grandfather planted grapes. Grew up in Sonoma, a family full of agriculture and just kind of part of the land. So I guess it was only natural that you have ended up making some of these wines. But you started back in 2003, right when Boisset acquired the property. But DeLoach comes with a very rich history even before that acquisition. So can you give us a little bit of background on DeLoach of what it was? Because I know you started there right before and then joined the Boisset team. So tell us a little bit about that.
Of course. Yeah. So I started with the DeLoach family. Actually, that was my first harvest and their last harvest at the winery. And when I started, it was really the culmination of many, many years that they had been farming in what we call the Olivet Bench, which is this great center part of the Russian River Valley. It was a parcel of land that they had purchased back in the late 1960s. At that point in time, it had been planted to, more historical varieties of the area, things like Palominos, Zinfandel, Mourvedre, that really weren't working so well economically back in the late 60s, early 70s. And so the DeLoach family actually talked to the local farm advisors, a couple other people, and they were convinced that Pinot Noir would be incredibly successful with their vineyard site. And so they became the very first people to plant Pinot Noir in what then became the Russian River Valley. Now, it wasn't the Russian River when they founded the winery back in 1975. It was still just, a center part of Sonoma County. And so after making the wines and crafting the wines, Cecil and Christine DeLoach in the early 1980s helped form the appellation. In fact, Christine DeLoach's signature is on the appellation form for the Russian River Valley appellation. And that's a very important distinction, I think, to show that, the DeLoach's really were behind this region coming to prominence and were pioneers in planting those Pinot Noir and Chardonnay grapes in the region at the very beginning. My time at the winery, we've seen a great evolution in winemaking there. We've gone from just, sourcing and growing grapes right in that center Olivet district, right in the center of the Russian River, to working, throughout the entire appellation. The Russian River is an absolutely beautiful place, fantastic soils and climates to see throughout it. One of my pleasures over the last 15 plus years has been exploring all those different areas. One in particular, the Green Valley, is really, I think, one of the most special places in the world to grow Pinot Noir. We have fantastic soils. The Gold Ridge soil, just incredibly well-drained, uplifted sandstone coming out of the Pacific Ocean. It's become a magical place for Pinot Noir grapes that people have known about now for 20, 30 years. But at DeLoach, it wasn't until Jean-Charles and his kind of Burgundian mindset of exploring all these different appellations came forward that we had that chance to really start exploring places like that. Our own estate in the center of the Russian River, we've, had a great time also in revitalizing it. When I first started working there in 2003, the property had been planted to that first generation of Pinot vines for a little over 30 years at that point. And unfortunately, like most things over time, they start to go into decline. And so we made a pretty big decision at that point to replant the site using biodynamic techniques. And that was a major investment, both in money, but also in time. It takes many years to convert a site to biodynamics. And what we've seen is just the resulting quality of the wines, not only growing in terms of just the flavors that we get, but also the quality of life on that site, the soil itself and the people around it. Just the energy is so much higher because of those conversions we've made.
That's beautiful. And with the planting and everything, but even when Boisset came in, I know you've done a lot to kind of lead this Pinot program since then, and you've taken on some of these Burgundian techniques, if you will. I mean, you're in a same grape and these same kind of techniques, but a different place. So what are kind of some of the things that you've, I guess, brought in and taken?
It's really a Burgundian mindset, I would say, that we brought forward. So we work in California. Our fruit is different, but at the same time, if we pay attention to individual sites, including those, those small parcels, those small pieces that are maybe adjoining a bigger part, but they have a different soil or a different aspect, but making sure we pick that separately. When we take it into the winery, we let the native yeast coming in off those vines do that fermentation. We don't bring in cultured yeast to do the fermentations and kind of uniformize things. We're actually trying to extract out the differences between those sites and using traditional techniques like punch downs where possible, going in there, for years and years, it was getting on top of these old wooden vats that we brought over from Burgundy. They'd been used for a generation in Burgundy before they showed up in our cellar in 2004, and climbing on top on a plank and, plunging the must down during fermentation has been part of the DeLoach tradition now for the last 15 plus years. And it's something we're passionate about. It takes a lot of energy. It takes a lot of paying attention to the little things. That to me is what Burgundian techniques are ultimately. It's when you're paying attention to the small differences, when you're paying attention to the difference in soil and different aspect, and letting that come out and speak through the wines that you've crafted. That's carrying on that tradition.
Well said. Yeah, and I think that Pinot Noir is one of those grapes that you really have to have attention to detail because it is delicate and it is finicky, if you will. So let's taste these wines. I hope some of you at home who have these wines are going ahead and diving in to taste them. But we're going to taste a little bit about them. And as we go through them, both Jean-Charles and Brian, I hope you'll kind of help to talk a little bit about both what we're getting in these wines that are similar, that will be similar to each other, as well as those things that are going to kind of express the differences. Because here we are, we have one grape, Pinot Noir, but we have two separate regions. And even though you're using the same grape and you're using the similar techniques, the top open top fermenters and the punch down method, and you're bringing this kind of Burgundian vision and this passion and attention to detail to both wines. They are very different wines. So I kind of want to talk a little bit about that. So as we're tasting through. So let's start with the Burgundy. So Jean-Charles, if you can you tell us a little bit about typical Burgundian characteristics in wine, and specifically, I guess, what we're getting out of this wine as we taste it, and just kind of what Pinot Noir means to you from Burgundy, because I know you speak so eloquently about it.
Well, thank you for providing this comparison, which is amazing. I really believe as a Burgundian that the Russian River and DeLoach is obviously the best ever option as well to compare and contrast, as Brian is a very talented and charismatic winemaker. What is so interesting with the Bouchard is a Burgundy Pinot Noir. So this is basically the association, the marriage of all the areas of Burgundy that you showed previously. Côte Chalonnaise, Côte de Nuit, Côte de Beaune, all blended together to create the perfect expression of Burgundy. So what do we look for in Burgundy? Is typically finesse, elegance, femininity, some very lingering power, and some very true characteristics to Pinot that means refinement. And we like a wine that really can be food and wine paired, not only with cheese, with poultry, but as well fish. And that's what I'm a big fan of this Burgundy Pinot, because I love trout as an example, or river fish. And this wine specifically goes very well with that. Why I love it as well, it goes very well with raw fish. I'm a big fan of sushi. And
yeah,
this is kind of the wine you want to have with it. So really refinement, elegance. You want to feel the earth of what Burgundy has to offer. And I think that very elegant profile. We have obviously oak influence in this wine. A portion of it is new French oak from the Tronchet forest, which is a very historical forest with the best oak trees, but not overly dominant. So I like this wine in addition to the fact that you can have it as an aperitif, one-on-one, just a small group of people without a lot of food. It's light, it's elegant, it's refined, and it's not overpowering, but it has a big message, which is really that little French kiss on the end, which makes it, I feel, extremely seductive as well. And that's personally what I always look for in a Burgundy, and the elegance and sophistication of it, and why Burgundy will always be this amazing 200 million years ago soil that with its aging profile gives little nutrients to the plant, so she goes deep for food and gives the best as an expression. Forgive me for the answer.
Oh, that was a beautiful answer. No, I love this answer. It is, because it talks about, you know, Pinot Noir is almost this just kind of mindset in a way. But I like that too. This is, I think this reflects so much of Burgundy, and it's a blend, which is good because you're taking out some of the best parts of each place.
And you know, Gwendolyn, exactly. This is typically the hardest wine to make in Burgundy. So I want to acknowledge to everybody, making a Clos Vougeot Grand Cru, one set place, very defined for the last 800 to 900 years, is easier. Premier Cru as well. Making a regional appellation like this is very challenging because really all the grapes come from everywhere. Like a great chef, the winemaking is on the sourcing. Think of Lao Tzu, my favorite philosopher, who said, think about the source. And here it's more prominent than ever. So we are on the sorting table, we pick out the best grapes, we do a portion of it whole cluster to give that really powerful foundation. So you have a great meat palate, but you have a very lingering finish as well, and really refined. That's what I love with wine, very ethereal to very romantic, very poetic, rather than very much in your face. It's a conversation. And
it is. Yes, but just Pinot Noir, and especially Burgundy and this kind of wine, it's almost like writing a poem. You just have all these beautiful adjectives that are just, you know, on the tip of your tongue. So thank you for making such a beautiful blend. It's gorgeous. Okay, that is our old world version. When I say old world, that kind of means Europe. So when we talk about New World versions, we're often talking about wines outside of Europe. So we're going to move on to the DeLoach, the American connection and our Franco-American. So this is, again, Russian River Valley, a premier wine growing region of Russian River. And Brian, you, again, started your first harvest, I think, in 2003 or around then. So you have been at DeLoach in Russian River. We talked a little bit about kind of the places and everything, but we have the same grape and you're using a lot of the same methods, but we have a very different wine. It is richer, it's bigger, it's bolder. Can you talk a little bit about why?
Without a doubt, yes. Working with Russian River Valley, we have to realize we're in sunny California. Burgundy can get warm, but California has one of the great summers that you can ever have anywhere in the world. And so we're blessed with lots of sunlight. We aren't dealing with those cooler, storms coming through during that time. And it gives us the ability to get fairly ripe flavors very, very easily in California. Combined with the soils that we're working with throughout the Russian River Valley, we have a great opportunity to really coax out some great roundness and richness within this wine. We work with two of the kind of the subregions within the Russian River. So the Olivet Bench is, on the earlier ripening side, we typically get a little bit more of a dark fruit profile coming out of the fruit in that area. The soils are called Huachica clay loams. Those are, our soils are not nearly as old as Burgundy's, but those soils for the region are a little bit older than what you would see as you get further west. There's a little bit more clay content to those soils, so the vines tend to be a little bit healthier. But still, because of the warmth that we do see, that we're picking these typically in late August, early September. Out in the west, out and towards the Green Valley, where we have that gold ridge sandy loam, those soils are very well drained. They don't hold on to nutrients. Typically, we're almost 3 weeks later in picking. And the fruit profile, as opposed to that kind of dark fruit and cola aspect, it gives us more of a sense of minerality, maybe just a touch of some, wild herb elements, as well as some really pretty kind of red to black cherry fruit profiles. So working with those different components, like Jean-Charles mentioned, it is up to the winemaker to assemble this blend in a way that hopefully helps all of those speak forward within the wine itself in a complementary fashion. So I always find that center Olivet bench fruit being the core, the soul of this wine, the heart, that's where that richness comes from. But then the length and the complexity and the elegance is coming out of that fruit out of the Green Valley, really giving you a long, lengthy palate. And what I think is fascinating, tasting both of these wines next to each other, you cannot help but identify both as Pinot Noir. You have that Pinotosity, as a former mentor of mine used to call it.
I'm totally stealing that. I love it.
Pinotosity. Yeah, I stole it first. So.
Okay.
But yeah, it's there, and they are completely different expressions of Pinot Noir. One is much softer and richer. One is a little bit more elegant and more finessed. But both have that same Pinot flavor profile coming out, and I think it's absolutely beautiful. To contrast the food pairing, like Jean-Charles was talking about, kind of lighter dishes, river fishes. To me, this is, and I grew up in Sonoma. I grew up on a farm, ranch out towards the coast. This to me, yells for that, grass-fed lamb coming out of those coastal fields. It is that classic Pinot Noir and lamb pairing, and I think maybe I'll have some of that later tonight.
Ooh, good idea. Are we coming to your house?
Yeah. I like that both of these are also blends. So one is a blend of Burgundy, and this is also a blend of Russian River Valley and Green Valley, and all these little pockets here to make this beautiful wine that has that kind of balance of the fruit and then the expressive elegance and the structure and everything kind of coming together. So these are beautiful. And I know we have received some questions from people before this event. So I was going to touch on a couple of things that they have asked. I kind of try to condense them a little bit. So we're not going to go through a line by line, but so I apologize if we're not getting to your question. You asked one. But one was optimal drink times for these styles of wines. And then how do they change as you go to different vineyard designations? So let's say in Burgundy, you're going up into the higher Premier and Grand Cru, and DeLoach, you're going into some of the single vineyard sites. So what are your kind of drink times for that? And does vintage matter? Which we can dive into that too.
Well, Brian, please.
Thank you. I would say that, starting with the first, in terms of drink time, I find our Russian River Pinot Noir really, you can enjoy it right on release. But for the most part, I would encourage you to let it sit for a couple years. and really let it come out. So if, you know, you had for example, a 2017, 2020 would be the perfect year to enjoy that wine after a couple years past vintage to open it up and pour. That said, there is an amazing device that everyone who loves wine should have at their house, and it's called a decanter. And especially with young wines, it does amazing things. And I highly encourage you, whenever you have a wine, especially something like a Pinot Noir, but it works on white wines as well, like Chardonnays, decant that wine, let it open up, let it breathe. You will see amazing things happen with bottles that maybe when you first popped that cork out of, you weren't quite so sure about. So invest in that decanter and decant wines like this. You will be rewarded for your efforts. In terms of how these wines progress through the different, you know, kind of tiers of vineyard designates that we work with, really it becomes much more specific in terms of the flavor profile that you see. I'm blessed that Jean-Charles has given me the opportunity to explore some very cool sites throughout not only Sonoma, but beyond. And each of those sites that we have decided to put a vineyard designate label on is because of the uniqueness in the way it speaks that vineyard through the winemaking process. And so when we look at sites like the Mabaroshi Vineyard down in the Sebastopol Hills, it has a Mabaroshi flavor to it. And it is a different feel in the glass, a different aromatic in the glass, and a different flavor profile on your palate that you won't find if you taste the DeLoach Estate, for example. And it's something that's hard to quantify without having those in front of you. So maybe we'll have to revisit them some other time. But that is what we look for. And I think, you know, just to touch one last thing on the vintage wise, California, we've been very, very lucky the past, almost 10 years now. We've had fantastic vintages every single year. That doesn't mean the wines don't taste different. You know, I have a perspective that the even years over the past few years have been much more accessible early on, where the odd years have maybe been a little bit more tannic and needed a little bit more aging. But that said, almost every single wine that I've come across in California over the last 10 years or so, there's a lot of good wines, and most of them can be enjoyed pretty early on.
That's great. Thank you. Yeah. And I have one more plug for a decanter just because it looks pretty. So even if you don't need it, it's a beautiful way to serve a wine. It enhances a dinner party. It just makes everything look nicer. So I'm a big fan of those. Jean-Charles, Burgundy and some of the other vineyard designations coming out of there. Drink time, because this is approachable now. How long can
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Gwendolyn. And I believe wine is a conversation. So when you serve yourself a glass of wine, I recommend all of us to have a conversation with a new friend, to sit down, look, feel, sense, and have a discussion. And I love myself opening multiple bottles of wine. And I recommend everybody goes to the Wine.com site and buy 6 bottles of each so they could see how they evolve over time.
Yeah.
Because every time, depending on the lunar cycle, depending on the time of the day, I find wine tasting differently. And depending on my mood, or the mood I'm with the person, or the family, or the friends, or the assembly. So I feel step number 1 is always to give time. Number 2, to obviously give air, as Brian said. If you have a decanter, this is wonderful. If not, open it. My mother had me bring the wine at time of lunch if it was for dinner, so the wine would feel comfortable with the temperature of the room, and have it open it an hour or 2 before, so the wine would feel comfortable with the guest that will come in. So wine is a human being, which means in English, the tense I prefer, present, progressive. So always evolving. The wine we will taste today, Gwendolyn, and we've had many wines together as well as with Mike, sometimes we say, oh, did we taste this together? We don't recognize this wine. Or we think this wine was tasting differently. And that's the beauty of wine. Like us as people, we act and behave differently. So my recommendation, in addition to all that, is to advise people to buy multiple bottles. For me, I buy in 3s. I have twin girls who are 9 years old, so I buy for them now, and I buy in 6s. So they each have 2 bottles. One we drink with my lovely wife, Gina, and another bottle I keep in the cellar. And I want to see how it evolves. So I recommend for wine, even of that approachability and even of that price point, I would really recommend for people to give time. Because when we make wine, we think of the enjoyment, not only today, but tomorrow. And I know patience is the hardest virtue to have, but sometimes I would advise for people to give a little patience to wine and to build their own cellar. So it's exciting for people when they have guests to allow them to discover the pleasure of their own memory.
That is so well said. And I thank you both for that. Yeah, this has been really pleasurable to kind of, I think, drink both of these. And I think on the last note, if you would use just maybe 2 or 3 words to describe your idea of what the Franco-American connection of Pinot Noir is, it would be.
Well, I'm going to start on this one. As the lover of America, I feel America really represents the exotism, the flamboyance, the incredible American way of life spirit that I love so much, the over the world personality, the French, the heritage, the tradition, and a little bit of excitement and romance into it. So I believe the two together, doing Gwendoline, what you've done and created today is fantastic, because it's not just comparing, contrasting, and not what the differences are, but what brings us together. And I would lead to all of us to that thought, is the world is what brings us together to enjoy 2 beautiful Pinot from what I believe are the 2 best regions on the planet, Burgundy, California, Russian River, and Sonoma Coast.
Thank you. Brian.
Well, I don't know if I can Jean-Charles there. He basically summed it up, I think, beautifully. You have 2 wines that speak so truly of the places that they're from. And you see the core connection between them, but really it is the personality of their origin that shines through. And that's what makes wine so wonderful and exceptional, and just absolutely great to have in the glass.
Well, maybe we should blend them, Gwendoline. Look at that.
We talked about that last time, right? You know, if you really want to taste the similarities.
What about if I do this? You know what I love, Gwendoline?
You have to do it first.
Well, I just did it.
Okay.
What's amazing is a lot of my Burgundy friends often, and you know, I was born and raised in Burgundy, so I have a lot of friends there. I taste Russian River blind, so they don't see the label. And a lot of them in cellars and in private environment would be blown away by the quality and the flamboyance and the expression of what California has to offer. So I think the blend equals 3. I've never been good in math, but 1 + 1
equals 3. And that is the most beautiful. So thank you so much, both of you. Thank you so much for joining us. I hope everyone enjoyed the wines. I hope you enjoyed the stories. And I think that these 2 things for me, what they show are 2 major things. That is a passion for wine and a true sense of place. So Jean-Charles, Brian, I really appreciate you coming on and talking and telling your stories and sharing these wines with people. I hope you at home enjoy them, both learning and tasting. And thanks for all the passion behind all these wines. And let's just
we should do the Bon Bourguignon, Gwendoline.
Oh, the la la la.
Yeah, in the old history of Burgundy, everybody should know.
You do? Okay. This will be our send-off, Jean-Charles. Let's do it.
We've been doing a tradition, which is a little song. Gwendoline knows it very well. Brian, of course. So let's sing it quickly together.
Okay.
1, 2, 3. To the love of wine, passion and the love
Pinot.
of each other.
And Pinot Noir.
La 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 la. La 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 la. Woo!
It's both a science and a form of high art. It's made from the combination of grapes, sunlight, rain, soil, and time. It's raised up in the moments that matter. It's wine. And we are Wine.com. We have the largest wine selection in the world, online sommeliers with free advice, and now our powerful new app puts the entire world of wine in your hands. Wine.com, seriously passionate about wine. Download our free app today.